Greetings everyone, John here with a quick video on BioShock and BioShock 2 running via the backwards compatibility feature on Xbox One. We've had a lot of requests for this one lately, and I agree, this is a more interesting release than usual. And the reason for that is simple. The BioShock series offers an unlocked framerate option on Xbox 360, which means a potential for improved performance. First though, I want to note that we're planning to work on a lengthier video in the new year focused on many of the top backwards compatible titles such as the Mass Effect series, while checking out other games which have been improved like Halo Reach, but for now, let's just focus on BioShock. So despite its age, BioShock was a strangely forward-looking game here by allowing users to remove the framerate cap via the options menu. On Xbox 360 then, this ultimately means disabling vertical sync. The game simply runs as fast as it can and the result is non-stop tearing. I always opted for the 30 FPS cap personally since it looked and felt so much more consistent, but it was nice to have the option. But as we've noted in the past, the emulation on Xbox One was designed to run all games with vertical sync fully engaged. Thus, in games where tearing was an issue, those problems are eliminated. As expected then, disabling the framerate cap on BioShock on Xbox One means that vertical sync is now forced. And with so many Xbox 360 games now offering smoother performance when running on the new console, there is potential for improvement here. And that's exactly what we have. With the cap removed, BioShock now manages to reach 60 frames per second, on a pretty regular basis without the bothersome screen tearing of before. You can see here that when running at its best, the results are indeed quite impressive. But if we compare it to the original 360 version, well, the difference becomes even more obvious. I decided to use this introduction sequence as a test between the two versions since it lines up perfectly. The difference is dramatic, to say the least. On Xbox 360, the frame rate spends the entire time south of 45 frames per second and often dips into the 30s. It really isn't smooth at all. In comparison, things are so much better on Xbox One. It's almost difficult to believe. Not only is the frame rate much higher, but all of those screen tearing issues have been eliminated. A very good thing considering just how many torn frames are visible here. I mean, look at that graph line on the 360. Would you really want to play BioShock that way? So this introduction scene definitely impressed me then, but it left me wondering just what we were going to get once we stepped into Rapture itself. Well, those results are not quite as positive as this, but it's not as far off as you might think either. During your typical gameplay scenario, the results are much more in line with this. You get those pockets where the frame rate jumps upwards and feels very smooth, but then it kind of comes dropping back down into the mid-40s, but it always remains quite playable. That's what's pretty cool about this whole situation. In that sense, what we're seeing here is actually rather similar to something like Tomb Raider the Definitive Edition on PlayStation 4, where the frame rate was uncapped and could run anywhere between 40 to 60 frames per second during normal gameplay. That's basically what you're going to get here with BioShock and Xbox One. So honestly, while it is definitely not as stable as we would like, it is such a huge jump, and it's really not a bad way to play BioShock right now if this is still the version that you own. But it's not entirely perfect either. Controller response feels a little bit strange at points, truth be told, as this feature was not built to function in this way. As the game jumps between different levels of performance, you'll actually kind of feel a variation in controller response. It doesn't feel as good as you might want, but it's still pretty playable. Okay, so BioShock 1 is looking pretty good then, right? Not perfect, but solid. So how about BioShock 2? Now, BioShock 2 runs on basically the same engine, but there were some improvements made. And for this one, I decided to play through the introduction sequence on Xbox One and found that the results aren't quite what I had hoped. Now, out of the gate, we see a similar level of variation here, but the drops, when they do occur, do seem to go lower than they did when running the original game. It doesn't feel quite as fluid overall, since you can turn in one direction and get 60 frames per second, and then move in another and it drops down to like 38. Now, of course, both of these tests are preliminary, since I'm only really looking at the very early areas of the games, but first impressions do suggest that BioShock 1 should be quite playable with the cap disabled, while BioShock 2 is perhaps more variable, since we've seen less real combat happening and it's already lower. So is this really a good way to replay BioShock then? Well, to be honest, with the low cost of the PC versions and the fact that they run on a toaster, I would kinda rather play it there since you can bump the resolution up all the way to the top and still hit 60 frames per second. However, if you own an Xbox One and the only copy of BioShock you have is the 360 version and have no interest in grabbing it on PC, well, this is certainly not a bad way to go. It's a lot better than playing the PS3 port, for instance. Now, of course, there's also the BioShock collection, and it doesn't really run as smoothly as that either. But as you can see, those versions also kind of have their own issues, with screen tearing popping up and plenty of weird little hitches and dips. Plus, the art changes aren't brilliant and the sound isn't as good, so it feels kind of unpolished all around, not an amazing effort. But the key thing to take away here is that BioShock is a perfect representation of the brilliance of Microsoft's engineers here. The backwards compatibility feature is really amazing at this point. So many games are now supported, I think it's over 300 now, and it even seems to run a lot of these games faster than the original hardware without any additional glitches or problems, most of the time at least. What more could you want? Well, maybe BioShock Infinite testing? Well, in that case, I'm afraid I actually bought that game on PC and don't have a copy handy here right now, so that'll have to wait till next year. As I mentioned at the start of the video though, we are planning to delve into a huge chunk of the major and minor titles just to see how they're running on Xbox One now. So perhaps at that point we can grab a copy of Infinite just for testing. But that's it for now. If you found this video interesting or useful, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, or even find us on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.